Welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Gamecock.
This is Rogers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rogers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into Gamecock Pod Live on National Signing Day, February the 5th, episode number 1683. Today used to be one of the biggest, most exciting days of the year. Now with the early December signing period, the transfer portal, all but 2 of the top 150 players were signed. It's really a very anticlimactic day, but man, there have been some doozies over the course of my lifetime for the Gamecocks. A lot of good stuff, some bad stuff, losing guys you think you're going to get. But South Carolina's roster is fairly set, at least until after spring practice. Welcome home and welcome into Gamecock Pod Live. We have got a great show on tap for you today. In just a few minutes, we will be joined by the Dean of Gamecock Baseball coverage, John Whittle from the BigSpur.com. We're going to take a deep dive into what to expect from year one of the Pau Mainieri Era, the season opener, just 10 days away. Of course, on that, not this Saturday, but next Saturday, the second game of the season, the field at Founders Park will be named Ray Tanner Field. Quite an honor for a legendary Hall of Fame coach who has had unparalleled success during his time as the Gamecocks head coach. All right, let's jump into our Nana's Porch news, notes, and headlines brought to you by the award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte area. Nana's Porch, your go-to for all your catering needs, whether it's a banquet, a wedding, a corporate event, or the big backyard bash with the whole hog barbecue. Nana's Porch has got you covered. And in time for the big game on Sunday, maybe you want some food dropped off. You don't feel like cooking. If you live in the Rock Hill, Fort Mill, Lancaster, Charlotte, Gastonia area, go to nanasporch.com. That's NANASPORCH.com. Get in touch with my good friend Chris Payne. Tell him the Cockfather sent you. Maybe they can drop off your Super Bowl spread, and make sure you include plenty of Nana's Porch award-winning pimento cheese. Even if you don't need anything dropped off or catered, order today. Go to nanasporch.com to the homepage, click in the top right-hand corner on pimento cheese. That'll take you to a hyperlink. You'll just be a few clicks away from having Nana's Porch award-winning pimento cheese delivered free of charge right to your front doorstep. It will be nicely packed and cold, ready to pop in the fridge, and then ready to be consumed along with everything else on Sunday. You got a Sunday matinee with South Carolina's women's basketball at number 4 Texas. That will be the Gamecocks' 5th top 5 matchup of the season. And then later, the big game, Dawn Staley will be leaving Austin, probably on a chartered jet to go to New Orleans for the Super Bowl to watch her Eagles take on America's team, Taylor Swift, all the Swifties, and the Kansas City Chiefs. All right, ESPN College Game Day will be in Columbia next Sunday, February the 16th, when number 2 South Carolina faces number 5 UConn, which will be South Carolina's 6th top 5 matchup of the season. They will descend upon Columbia. The game will be broadcast. College Game Day will be there at least an hour prior to tip-off with their show to highlight what should be another sellout crowd. And boy, talk about back-to-back Sundays. Number 4 Texas and number 5 UConn should be another 18,000 sellout at Colonial Life Arena. So make sure you get your tickets for that. The Gamecocks, prior to Sunday's game at Texas, will travel to Georgia on Thursday. They are 21-1, winners of, I think, 15 straight. They are 9-0 in the SEC. And so we'll dive more into that with Michael Sauls coming up in the second half of our show. All right, Clyde Wren was honored earlier this week by the university. His name now is on the players' entrance at the Long Family Football Operations Center. It is the Clyde Wren Players' Entrance, and there's probably nobody in the state of South Carolina that has meant more to college football over the last 50 years than Clyde Wren, one of the architects of Danny Ford's dynasty at Clemson. He came to South Carolina in the early 1990s, where he has been ever since, and he's been instrumental behind the scenes in some of the biggest recruiting wins in South Carolina history. Congratulations to Clyde Wren. And yesterday, USC Athletics Director Jeremiah Donati was quoted in a press release that the Williams-Brice Stadium project to add premium seating on the west side, I think they're going to turn that club level into suites. They're going to add more premium seating in the top rows of the west lower level. I personally would have preferred them to move the Jumbotron and do something similar to what Clemson's done by adding in that north end zone on George Rogers Boulevard just a whole bank of suites similar to Clemson's West Zone project, and maybe even bowl in that end of the stadium. Let's go ahead and bring in John Whittle and get his thoughts on the Williams-Brice premium seating project. It looks like a nice, crisp sunny day in Columbia. John, welcome home and welcome in. It's always a pleasure to have the dean of Gamecock Baseball coverage. And really, quite frankly, you've covered all Gamecock sports more than anybody else in the Midlands. I don't know, maybe DC at the Post and Courier is your only rival there. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, DC's got me a little bit. If you want to go into the TV market, Rick Henry's got me a little bit, and Reggie Anderson. Those three guys have all been around forever. But you know, I've been around a lot longer than I thought now too. I'm getting a lot older than when I started out on this beat. Back, I guess, about 24 years old, maybe something like that. So been around for a minute now, but yeah, it's been interesting times right now in South Carolina athletics with baseball getting started, the project taking its next steps, and basketball season's been a little dicey as well.
Yeah, we're going to try to avoid that. Last week, I had my lowest attended YouTube show because we talked a lot of Gamecock men's basketball. I don't really think anybody wants to hear much about that right now. So, John, this used to be one of the biggest days of the year. Now it's
now you're talking to me.
Well, I would have been talking to you probably anyway, as part of a lineup of folks on National Signing Day, but South Carolina's roster appears set at least until the April portal period. There were, I can go all the way back to the early 90s when I struck up my friendship with Brad Scott. Really, you can go back to Joe Morrison when I was in school. And I still remember before I went to class, I lived at the Honors College. And, it's the Honors College now. It used to be the rattiest dorms in the history of any state university, the Honeycombs. I don't know if you remember those or not.
I do. I was in school for those.
Yeah. So you need to make sure if you had early morning class, you walked underneath the hangover. Otherwise, you never could tell what kind of liquid could land on top of your head. So at any rate, I still remember on National Signing Day in 1985, calling the studios of the South Carolina Network and Phil Kornbluth telling me Todd Ellis had picked South Carolina. He was the number one quarterback in the country. It's a big battle with Stanford and North Carolina for him. Unfortunately for him, he had 4 different offensive coordinators in 4 years, and steroids and run and shoot. And then his last offensive coordinator, they finally decided they were going to run the ball first. And he was having a great senior year and then suffered a knee injury. But I know Brad Loing and countless other USC assistants spent many a sleepless night. Shane Beamer, the night before he got Alshon Jeffrey's signature on a national letter of intent. It just used to be just a very intense 48 hours prior to National Signing Day. Now it's just kind of an afterthought.
Yeah, and actually the Todd Ellis injury is the first memory I have of South Carolina football was watching him get hurt. At least in person, that's the first memory I have from a game. But yeah, you're right. I got a text message from a radio guy yesterday, double checking with me, asking if there was anybody signing with South Carolina today, and I said to him, I had to think for a minute. I was like, no, I don't think so. I don't think they're expecting anything like that. So yeah, I mean, that just kind of shows you where where things are. Not only are they not signing anybody, but I gotta pause for a second and take a second to think. So yeah, that's where signing day is now, and that's why on the first Wednesday of February you're calling me to talk Gamecock baseball instead of Hale to talk recruiting or anybody else. So that's why we're here today, is because today doesn't have much influence in the world anymore of football recruiting.
Well, we still don't want to diminish the importance of having John Whittle to go in depth on Gamecock baseball, that's for sure. And so before we get to that, the Super Bowl is Sunday. It is Dawn Staley's Philadelphia Eagles versus Addison's Kansas City Chiefs with Taylor Swift and Patrick Mahomes. You got a Super Bowl pick for us today?
I don't. I'm looking forward kind of to the Puppy Bowl. I think that starts at 2:00. So I'll probably be watching that most of the afternoon. No, I don't think anybody can bet, including me, against Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes. So I guess that's who I'll pick. I think I'm like most and not as intrigued this year as usual. Not only are these two of the more unlikable teams out there, but it's also a rematch. So, that's just part of it. But, we'll watch it anyway and see what happens.
So I'll be in Austin. So I think your dog disagrees. I think your dog's picking the Eagles, probably due to the fact that Champ Staley, Dawn Staley's dog, is also picking the Eagles. So
yeah, I'm guessing that's what's going to happen over there as well. But no, we got the dogs quiet now, so we should be okay.
All right, so let's dive in. It is year one of the Pau Mainieri era at South Carolina, a national championship coach, a great track record in his own right. And so, number one, just give me your initial thoughts on the new head coach at South Carolina, what you've observed from him from fall practice through winter practice, as we're about 10 days away from opening day. And what are the things that are most important to him, and what should we expect stylistically from his teams, as he continues his career as the head baseball coach at South Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to work. They're going to pay attention to detail. It's a lot more of that, this year than previously. There's a lot more structure within the program, and I'm not saying one's right or the other necessarily. I mean, I tend to lean more towards Pau Mainieri's way, but Mark Kingston was more of a hands-off professional manager versus a college baseball coach. Mark kind of let the players run the program, and he let them kind of handle things. He viewed them as like almost professional players. Like, you get your work done, you do what you feel like you need to do, and we'll show up and play ball. And that doesn't mean that he wasn't at practice or coaching or anything like that. It was just more of a professionally run organization. And there's not a whole lot of structure or accountability in that. And Pau Mainieri's the opposite. There's a lot more of the other way, and I think college athletes need that. I think most people need that, but certainly college athletes. And I think it's fared well for a lot of the guys who are returning, and maybe not everybody, but I think it's fared well for a lot of folks who are returning. And that's one of the biggest difference just in how they go about their day to day. When it comes to when it comes to the actual on-field stuff, I don't know that there's a whole lot different. I will say that Mainieri talked about in his opening press conference, and you can see it a little bit that they're going to be a little bit more aggressive. They're not looking to lead the league in walks, like this team has in the past, or be right near the top of the league in walks. They're going to go out there and try to hit and be aggressive, and that's putting the ball in play. So I feel like we've seen more of that in general, and I think some of that's also due to recruiting. They've brought in a couple of guys with low strikeout rates, better bat to ball skills, your Henry Kasmers, your Dalton Mayshores. So I think you see a little bit of that from the portal as well. But this isn't going to be a big stolen base team. It's not going to be a big hit and run team. They're going to do a little bit of those things, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you there's going to be a whole lot that's fundamentally different. They didn't go out there and recruit, a ton of home run hitters. There's not going to be like one piece of one style of baseball that's going to overwhelm anything else that is just completely off the wall from what last year's, or from what a baseball team typically is. Like Kentucky steals their way into Omaha last year. Like, that's not going to be South Carolina. There's more options on defense. I would tell you that there's a greater emphasis on defense. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but there's better players who are better defensively, and you're going to see a difference from a defensive standpoint. There's more pitchers, there's more depth on the mound, so you're going to see perhaps a few more guys this year than maybe typical, but that's just kind of where things are from my estimation on Paul and this coaching staff.
So let's talk about the coaching staff a little bit. He was able to bring his old pitching coach from Notre Dame, Terry Rooney, in with him, and then he added a young guy in John Hendry, who had been kind of an analytics and recruiting guy at the University of Virginia, with another one of Pau Mainieri's former assistant coaches. What have you seen from those guys? Obviously, Rooney and Hendry have pitching coach backgrounds. What have you seen from those guys, and in particular the recruiting chops? And then a guy well, Monty Lee, has his role really changed from Mark Kingston staff to now with Pau Mainieri?
Oh, with Terry and John, they're both working with the pitching staff, obviously. Terry is a very experienced guy, is both a pitching coach and very strong reputation as a recruiter, just from a pitching coach standpoint first. Like, they're working together to some degree, but it's Terry's world. John, this is his first time as an on-field coach, and and I'm not trying to minimize him when I say this or anything like that, but he's kind of learning as he goes on this. And this is basically the volunteer assistant position from a couple of years ago. Like, this isn't necessarily, this isn't something where, South Carolina is going to battle with an arm behind its back or something like that. Like, this is the way it works. Like, you will oftentimes bring up a younger coach in that position who's really good at what he does. And, but this is his first time as an on-field coach. So he's getting out on the road recruiting for the first time. And he's more involved for the first time on being a part of the development of pitchers. So he's learning the ropes from a veteran guy in Terry Rooney. And Terry Rooney has a lot of energy. He's the first guy into the office. He's the last guy out of the office. And a lot of that is working with pitchers, but a lot of that is recruiting too. He gets after it. He knows that he's got to work really hard to be a great recruiter, and he puts that time in. And, you know, whether it's contacting coaches or players or what have you, like he's putting in more time and effort than there's no one putting in more. I won't say he puts in the most because I don't know, but I can tell you there's nobody putting in more. So, you know, but from a how is recruiting going standpoint, I don't know. And I'll tell you why, because they don't have a whole lot going on when it comes to recruiting individual players right now and getting commitments. You know, college baseball is in the midst of cutting down its roster size. Like there are programs that had over 60 players, you know, this time last year, or at least in the fall of I guess 23, you know, going into things. And now the roster is going to be hard capped and that anything is official just yet on where I know the coaches are trying to propose some amendments, but you know, it may be 35 players. And when you start school in August, and a lot of coaches are used to having, you know, 40 guys, 50 guys, and some 60 guys. So, you know, South Carolina has trimmed its roster and got rid of a few players at the break that were on scholarship and that were really good. They got rid of a kid named Brady Jones. And, you know, he, in his first outing down in junior college in Florida, he was up to 96. He's got North Carolina and Florida State calling him. So like they're having to trim the roster on good players. And, you know, they've got some high school recruits and committed guys, but they're going to want to bring in some guys from the transfer portal and junior college. And, you know, it's just one of those things where, you know, there's not a whole lot of activity that can be done right now as everybody in college baseball tries to figure out what rosters are going to look like and team makeup and how things are going to look. So, you know, they're Terry and Monty or not Monty to this point, but, you know, these guys are working hard to develop relationships and just kind of understand the landscape of where things are going to be and how to best attack it, because South Carolina is only going to have so many open roster spots, you know, in the summer after graduation, and you got to figure out how to best attack those spots and manage your roster going into next year. And that's going to be a kind of a learning curve for everybody in college baseball, not just here at South Carolina. And Monty's doing his thing from a coaching standpoint. Like last year, Monty had great influence over the team offensively in terms of, you know, putting on plays, whether it's, you know, hit and runs or bunts or base running plays, what have you. Like he basically ran the offense for South Carolina. And you know, that's not going to be necessarily the case this year. I mean, Mainieri is going to be running that show. So, you know, I'm not going to say he's been de-emphasized, but, you know, maybe he has been a little bit, but not from a coaching and development standpoint. It's more of an in-game action standpoint. But, you know, Monty's doing his thing, and his principles haven't really changed, and you know, that's how they're attacking this thing this year.
So in Pau Mainieri's press conference, he went out of his way to really just gush about Monty Lee and everything that he brings to the program. I mean, just your thoughts on, you know, if anything's changed with that. I mean, obviously with a hands-on head coach, something had to change a little bit with Monty's role. But, you know, from where I sit, I think he's instrumental because basically none of those guys have ever been in South Carolina before. And, you know, Monty Lee's like the equivalent to Tommy West and Miles Aldridge from having spent their whole career. You know, they could walk into any high school. They knew everybody from the principal to the guidance counselor to the janitors and their wives' names and their anniversaries. I think that's invaluable for South Carolina to, you know, dominate in-state recruiting.
Yeah, Monty's really important, obviously, for a lot of reasons. Those reasons that you listed, his rapport with the players, many of whom he's recruited and coached, or both. Since he's been back, he's great in terms of knowing who to talk to and all the connections that he has. But make no mistake, like Terry Rooney's out there too, and he wants to develop all those relationships as well. So, he's talking to all these high school coaches and players as well. And, you mentioned the recruiting standpoint, and I agree that that's important, but at the same time, I don't know that you're going to see more than 4 or 5 high school guys in a baseball recruiting class anymore. Like there was a time where, South Carolina's brought in 15 or 16 guys in a high school recruiting class. And I just don't know that that's going to be the case anymore. So you're taking the 4, 5, 6 best players. And in-state is obviously going to be very important, especially from a scholarship standpoint. But, it's recruiting's changing too, and we'll have to see how it evolves. But, I don't think you're going to be bringing in, more than a dozen in a class very often, when you consider the portal and junior colleges as well. So, all of that's changing a little bit, and they're all figuring that piece of it out as they go. And, Monty is certainly instrumental in all of that. And, Terry's the recruiting coordinator. Terry's the dude, and he's getting out there and building those relationships as well. Nobody's ever going to be like Monty on this staff, but they're working hard on that as well.
All right, so you've been out there a lot at the scrimmages. Tell us what you like about this team from what you've observed, as we're about 10 days away from opening day, and where maybe some positions that maybe are not solidified, or maybe there's some concerns 10 days away from opening day.
Well, as we sit here today, I think things are starting to shake out a little bit more clearly. Like, you came in the preseason with some questions about second base and third base, and really first base, and both the corner outfield spots, because Ethan Petrie is going to be somewhere, and Kennedy Jones is going to be somewhere with how he's hit. But who fits where, and how do all the pieces fall in line? But I think those things are kind of, I won't say definitely been answered right now, but I think we've got a much better feel for where everybody's going to be. Thomas LaCroix is going to catch, and we know that. And Henry Kazmer is going to play short, and we know that. And Nathan Hall is going to play center, and we know that. But I feel like as we sit here today, Ethan Petrie is probably going to start at first, and KJ Scovey is going to start at third. I think Kennedy Jones will probably DH, and Blake Jackson probably play in left field. And Dalton Mayshore probably in right field. And, second base is a little bit more tricky because, Nolan Naraki, who I think is the guy that they want to play at second base, he's been banged up with a knee, and he hadn't been playing in the field in the scrimmages. I think that's probably going to happen this weekend. And if it does, that's a very good indication that, he'll be ready by opening weekend to be full go. So, I think Nolan Naraki is going to end up at second base, and that's kind of where things stand right now. I think Kennedy Jones could play in left field over Blake Jackson. Blake hasn't exactly torn it up, this preseason. Ryan Bakes is a guy who's hit a little bit better and could be the backup catcher. Max Coffer's actually hit really well too, which is a little bit of a surprise. So, either of those guys could slide into the DH role and maybe be a little bit better offensively. At least how they're playing right now, like we know what Blake Jackson is. So, Kennedy Jones has really improved as an all-around player, and he could go out there in left field and play that position more competently than last year. I think he does have a little shoulder thing going on right now, so I think he'll probably DH. But that's something that you can see from time to time. Is I think they're more open to putting Kennedy out in the outfield versus at DH right now than maybe they would be if this team were playing last year. So, that's kind of where things are. Second base could change a little bit. KJ Scobie is. I think they're going to live with some ups and downs with him over there as a freshman, both from an offensive and defensive standpoint. But maybe that could, that could change a little bit. I think you'll probably see Ethan Petrie move out into right field from time to time late in games to put Bo Hollins in there at first base as a defensive replacement. So I think you can see some little minor tweaks and alterations from time to time. But I think we got a pretty clear idea on what the lineup is going to look like, and I think things are starting to come together from a pitching standpoint a little bit more clearly as well.
All right, so let's talk about the pitching staff. What have you seen from them? Obviously, Eli Jersenbeck, he's coming back off that injury. Matthew Becker returns. If you had to project a weekend rotation, who do you think could be the top 3 or 4 or 5 guys that are in the mix for that?
Well, Eli Jersenbeck's the guy to talk about. He hasn't been nearly as good in the build up to this thing as you would want him to be. Like, he has not looked like a Friday night starter, and I don't think that he's going to be the opening day starter. If you would have asked me this 2 weeks ago, I would have certainly circled him as the guy, but he just hasn't pitched well enough. I mean, just to be frank about it. Matthew Becker, to me, has been South Carolina's best pitcher since this team stepped onto campus in August, and I don't really think has been all that close, to be honest with you. He's been far and away the best guy. Dylan Eskew has looked like that at times. I think those 3 are gonna be your opening weekend rotation: Dylan Eskew and Matthew Becker and Eli Jersenbeck. And I won't swear to Jersenbeck, but if he puts together a decent start this weekend, then I think he'll probably be in there. His stuff is too good, and I think you probably end up giving him the opportunity out there on opening weekend. But I wouldn't bet I wouldn't bet a mortgage payment on it. That's for sure. So I think I would probably start Becker because he's pitched best, but they may want to go Eskew and have the lefty break things up. Jake McCoy is a guy who's kind of in the mix, and Parker Marlotte's kind of in the mix. Jarvis Evans has pitched really well, and he should be in the conversation too. But those are kind of the guys right there who you look at and is potential starters right now. But I think it'll probably be some combination of Eskew, Becker, and Jersenbeck. But Jarvis Evans is, to me, the kind of sleeper guy to keep an eye on.
All right, how about the bullpen? I know we're 10 days out, and I know, you got the early season. Are there some guys that maybe aren't ready now that you could see as the season progresses that their roles increase? And then, are there clearly defined bullpen roles? Like you said, there could be more pitchers, which means maybe fewer innings from South Carolina starters. But as far as, the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning where you need a lefty on lefty matchup or righty on righty, or you need somebody to get those last 3 or 4 outs, who maybe are those guys that at least appear to be likely to fill those roles when the season gets underway?
Right. I would circle right now Brendan Sweeney is the closer, is the 9th inning type of guy. If there's a traditional closer in place, and Mainieri's talked about using guys extended it into games who are pitching well, but we'll kind of see how that goes. If you're looking for like a traditional closer, I think Brendan Sweeney is probably the guy. But you look at this roster of pitchers, and to me, there haven't really been any guys who just aren't good enough. And part of this is just a developmental piece. When I say this, like coaches, as we've talked about, have brought in a lot of guys and have developed guys from time to time over the course of time. Don't necessarily bring in guys to pitch as freshmen, but bring in some low scholarship or walk-on guys and develop them. But so in the past, there's usually 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 guys who you don't expect to be any good, and in that year, or not be any good, play a significant role in a given year. And when I look at this roster full of pitchers, I can't pick out a guy who I could say this guy will have no role this year. And usually I can pick out a couple of guys. Now, there will be some who have no role. You can't pitch. I can't remember exactly how many guys they have on the roster, 15, 16. Not all of those guys are going to play a significant role. But if you told me like Aiden Palmer is going to be a guy who throws 30 innings out of the bullpen, I'd say, okay, I can see that. If you told me he pitches only 4 or 5 innings, I could say, you know what, I can see that too. So much of this is going to be, when the lights come on, who performs well. And, they're going to get opportunities. There's nobody who's pitched so poorly that they're out of the mix or anything like that. So you can see some guys go up and down over the course of the year. Sometimes pitch well, sometimes pitch poorly, and there's guys right there to back them up. But we haven't even talked about Roman Kimball, who pitched, who's last year for South Carolina. There's 3 freshmen, Ryder Guarino, Cooper Parks, and Zach Russell. All 3 of those guys have some real juice. Cooper Parks was up to 96. Russell's been up to 95, and Guarino, I think, has at least been 94. He may have been 95 as well. So, these guys have some lively arms, and I think those guys will keep getting better. Hadn't mentioned Tyler Pitzer. Like these are all guys who could really be really good, and it's going to take some time to kind of sort some of those things out. But Jarvis Evans is somebody who I think is ultimately going to come out of the bullpen, and I think he's going to be really good as a lefty. Ashton Crowther from Miami, he's going to be a lefty to go in there and get some outs as well at times. So there's just a lot of different guys who are going to play or are going to have a chance to factor into the season, and we'll see how things kind of shake out as time goes along.
All right, so as we wrap it up here, what's the floor for this team, and then what do you think is the ceiling? I know that's a very hypothetical because, as we all know, things can change. We've seen that recently with teams like Ole Miss puttering out at the season, getting hot in the tournament, and then going all the way to Omaha. So, but just big picture, as you look at the team, what's the floor and what's the ceiling as we sit here 10 days away? And obviously, subject to change. I'm not trying to pigeonhole you into anything.
Yeah. It's tough to answer because, I really respect Mark Etheridge from D1 Baseball. He follows baseball in the Southeast hardly anybody out there. And he has South Carolina 15 out of 16 in the SEC, which is kind of mind-boggling to me. But, then I start thinking about basketball and relate it to basketball this year. South Carolina's not an 0-9 talent team. They're not the 16th, a typical 16 team in the SEC, but maybe they are this year. I still don't think they're going to finish 16th in the league this year. That's an aside, but the basketball team. But is the SEC that loaded this year to where a good South Carolina team is going to be 15th in the league? I don't think so. But I got to think that finishing at the bottom of the conference is a floor. I respect Mark Etheridge too much to say that there's no shot that South Carolina's down at 14th, 15th, 16th in the league. He's got a better feel for what the rest of the league looks like than I do. But I will say I don't think that this team will be there. I think there's enough talent to where South Carolina is going to be better than that. In terms of ceiling, I do agree with Mark Etheridge when he said, this isn't a real high ceiling team. I do think that this team can play well enough to host a regional. We'll see what that looks like. I think this is, but I'll be interested too to see how the selection committee does it. They usually try to cap things a little bit on the SEC, but can you do that now with this conference? I mean, you could have a dozen teams, ranked in the top 20, and at some point, you've got to give more than 7 or 8 hosts, and you've got to do more for the league that's going to dominate college baseball and has dominated college baseball. So, does the SEC still get 7 or 8 hosts? If they do, South Carolina is probably going to be on the outside looking in of that. And do they keep trying to balance it among states and regions? Like, is Clemson going to get a host? Is Coastal Carolina going to get a host? If South Carolina is sitting down there at 8th or 9th in the league, and one of those 2 teams gets a host, then they're not going to give South Carolina one to give the state of South Carolina more than one. There's so much of those aspects at play later on, but I don't think South Carolina can challenge for the league this year. I don't think that they can challenge for a bye in the SEC tournament. I think this is a year where they're probably mid-pack in the league, and if they've played pretty well, and if they don't, Mark Etheridge might be right. But I do think there are some positions where there are some upside where maybe D1 baseball hasn't looked at it. But if you really think about it, Ethan Petrie's a stud, but beyond that, does South Carolina have very many more bona fide studs out there? You thought Jerzenbeck was one, but he hasn't pitched like one yet. Even if he was, that's you're still kind of low on them, right? So I do think there's some really good players. I think most SEC teams have more than one guy who can say, yeah, I've got a great shot of being an all SEC player. And I think South Carolina's got one of those right now. And I think that's going to be a little bit to its detriment, going forward this season. But, we'll see how some guys develop. Nathan Hall, I think, has a chance, and Kennedy Jones might have a chance, and Matthew Becker might have a chance. So and maybe Henry Kasmer too. But we'll kind of see how it goes. But I think that South Carolina at its ceiling might be able to squeak in a regional host, and then you go from there. I'm not saying South Carolina can't end up in Omaha for the reasons you mentioned. This all comes down to matchups and who's playing right well and who's playing right at the right time. But in terms of where things stand at the end of the regular season, I think South Carolina's probably on the outside looking in from a host standpoint. But, it would be a really, really disappointing year if this team doesn't make the tournament. There's no reason this team shouldn't make the tournament.
John, great stuff as always. We'll be following all your stuff at thebigspur.com. Nobody does it better covering Gamecock baseball. Thank you so much for being with us today, my friend. Be well, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Well, I certainly appreciate you having me. Hopefully I didn't eat into Michael Sauls' time over there. I welcome him back for me from into Columbia and to the women's basketball beat, and I'm sure that he's going to do a hell of a job on that for the state. So, but I appreciate you having me on. Always good talking to you, Keith, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thanks, John. That is John Whittle from the Big Spur, the dean of Gamecock baseball coverage. We're going to ask Michael to be patient with me for just a couple of minutes. Today's show is powered by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. All you have to do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. And with the big game almost here this week, it's now or never. Don't miss out on the last football game of the season with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the big game. Prize Picks is also giving away a free pick for the big game where you can choose either one of the starting quarterbacks who only have to throw for 1 yard for you to win. If you're correct on at least one more stat projection, you can win real cash. Prize Picks also invented the flex play, which means you can cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect. You can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And Prize Picks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. I've made my Super Bowl picks. I like the more than. It's easy. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code Gamecocks50 to get $50 instantly after you make your first $5 play. That's right. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code Gamecocks to get $50 instantly after you make your first $5 play. So this week, I like Patrick Mahomes going more than 1/2 of a passing yard. I think that's definitely a winner. I've got Travis Kelce with more than 61.5 yards receiving. I've got Jalen Hurts with more than 1/2 of a rushing or receiving touchdown. We all know the tush push is a thing. I'm expecting one of those. I like A.J. Brown for more than 70.5 receiving yards. And I also like Devontae Smith for more than 50.5 receiving yards. So I'm looking forward to a big day on the last football game of the year with Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, let's bring in Michael Sauls from Go Gamecocks and the state. Michael, welcome home. Welcome back in.
Thank you.
Always great to have you with us. And so the big game is Sunday. Do you have a Super Bowl pick?
I don't know. I've been going back and forth. It feels like it's one of those things where it's wrong to pick against the team as good as the Chiefs, but also, I mean, the Eagles are very good this year. So, and I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm a Broncos fan. So I guess if I were to have a dog, I'd have to pull against the divisional rival. So I'll go Birds.
All right. I like it. All right. So women's basketball picked up their 70th consecutive home win on Sunday. It really wasn't so much about that, even though that is another SEC record. It was kind of more about celebrating the past and getting a glimpse of the future. Asia Wilson's jersey retirement ceremony. I don't think I've ever seen one better than that. The best player in the world, I told her that her sophomore year. I said, you're the best player in the world. You just don't realize it yet. And she has accomplished more than any other South Carolina student athlete. Much deserved honor for her that nobody will ever wear number 22. And then she joined the broadcast in the second quarter. Obviously, you didn't hear that. Maybe you watched the replay. And, you know, we saw the glimpse of the future. Joyce Edwards, a freshman from Camden, she led the team in scoring once again. She is this team's leading scorer off the bench as a true freshman. She had 18 points, 5 rebounds, 2 steals, 2 assists, and no turnovers. And that prompted Asia Wilson to say, hey, Joyce Edwards is going to be the best player in the world someday. And Dawn Staley made sure to let the media know, hey, this is not a one-player race for National Freshman of the Year or SEC Freshman of the Year. People need to pay attention to Joyce Edwards and to some of our players. And Michael, by the time College game day rolls into Columbia a week from Sunday, that will be South Carolina's sixth top 5 matchup of the season. But just talk to us about the atmosphere on Sunday. It was Asia Wilson's day. They had the number 22 T-shirts out for the crowd, just like they did in 2014 when she made her official visit. For the Florida game, they had the yellow T-shirts for the fans that said there's no place like home. And certainly that made a big impact on her. And then the career she has had at South Carolina, leading them to their first national championship. What a day for Asia Wilson.
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, obviously, you know, she's had such an impact, not only on this program, but really the university and Columbia and arguably, you know, the state as a whole. So the atmosphere was great. I mean, it was one of those where you looked up and it was kind of crazy that it was 11:30 on a Sunday morning. Like, you didn't expect it to be packed out and as rowdy as it was. But obviously, I mean, she talked about it, how much the support from, you know, the fans has meant to her over the years. I mean, she was emotional clearly as the jersey was being rolled down from the rafters and everything. So it was a great atmosphere. I've never got to be a part of a jersey retirement, I don't think, and that was a pretty good one to be a part of for the first jersey retirement. But and then obviously you go out and you have a big old SEC win immediately following it. So I think it was a solid afternoon in Colonial Life.
56 consecutive SEC regular season wins, a 70-game home win streak. Both of those will be in jeopardy this month. So, you know, we don't want to forget Georgia on Thursday, but you get the Super Bowl Sunday matinee in Austin, Texas, ranked number 4, South Carolina number 2. That is going to be a massive rematch. South Carolina blew Texas out 67-50 in a game that really wasn't as close as the final score indicated. But I don't really expect Texas to shoot 18% in the first half on Sunday like they did. You know what? I think for me personally, my keys is, hey, they're going to have a pretty good atmosphere in Austin on Sunday. It's going to be a big deal hosting South Carolina. Obviously, that's going to be a revenge game. I think South Carolina is going to have to handle that opening shot from Texas. Yeah, Madison Booker, Rory Harmon, and company. But what are kind of your keys for that game, and how do you see the matchup with Texas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be hard. Obviously, I mean, I was surprised at how big they beat them, at home last time they played them. But I think it's going to be a crazy atmosphere, like you said. Super Bowl Sunday matinee. I think stopping or keeping a lid on Maddie Booker again is going to be a big key. Obviously, she missed a lot of chip shots, and Dawn said that after the game last time around. But if you can get her to miss those chip shots again, or keep her, her impact on the box score relatively limited, that'll be big to coming away with a win over there. But also, I feel like the rebounding discrepancy in the last month since Ashton Watkins has been out has been kind of not necessarily a glaring problem, but something that is definitely, that has popped up despite the fact that they haven't lost, in SEC play. So that's something that they'll need to tighten up, really. But I think it really is just those two. I mean, because obviously the offense is doing just fine. The defense is doing just fine. I mean, they've forced several turnovers in these last couple of games. Stealing all their steals have been great, despite the fact that, Auburn put up, I think it was almost 50% or just right at 50% as the shooting from the field last game. They still managed to beat Auburn by, 20 points. So I think they're doing fine. They just got to be able to keep a lid on Maddie Booker and kind of make up some ground in the rebounding battle that they've kind of lost in these last couple of games.
Yeah, I think if you got to hold down Madison Booker. You can't let Rory Harmon really start feeling it. And then the second chance points, I think, are going to be really a factor, and turnovers, because, we've said, last time South Carolina played Texas, I think they had like 25 turnovers, and they had 16 of them in the first half. And, they are only turning it over about 12 to 13 times a game. You just can't give up that many possessions this time and have as big of a field goal attempt deficit as you had in that first game. I think that's really going to be critical. Texas, I'm pretty sure, attempted over 20 more shots than South Carolina. They had like 14 fewer turnovers than South Carolina, and they still lost by, almost 20 points. So that's going to be big. But I think we got to talk about Joyce Edwards. I mean, at this point, I didn't expect it. I mean, you are talking about a team that went 38-0 last year. They returned every player on the roster except Camila Cardoso, yet a true freshman who was playing soccer and volleyball and basketball this time a year ago at Camden High School is leading the team in scoring and averaging about 15 points per game in SEC play. And quite frankly, she's South Carolina's best post player.
Yeah, Joyce was one of those that you kind of figured would have an impact coming in, but you didn't expect it to have this much of a sustained impact, I guess, the way that she's been able to consistently do it. I think Dawn has talked about how, when Ashlyn went out, it was kind of a, hey, we're not going to tell you we need more of you, but she has stepped up nonetheless. I mean, it just looks so casual when she scores. And we talked about that after the game. And it's just kind of, she's able to put herself in good positions to score, which is why, she is leading the team off the bench. But she's such a presence in the post, really. And she is, she's been phenomenal in SEC play. She's continued to get better. She's going to be a problem for the next however many years she decides to stay at South Carolina, because arguably she could probably leave early if she wanted to. But she's phenomenal. A great basketball player. And it's crazy to think that, typically there's like a freshman wall, and she has just not hit that at all yet.
I mean, no doubt. It's hard for me to have even imagined that Joyce Edwards, when you look at her body of work over the course of the season, I mean, Joyce Edwards, just how deliberate she is in the post, her post moves, how it just seems like she never gets sped up. the game is really never too fast for her. I thought the only time I've seen that is probably a little bit against Texas and a little bit against LSU, just because there were 18,000 people packed to the rafters and the noise level was just off the charts. And that atmosphere is one of one. And, for a young player, I think that's really the only time I've seen her be affected. But, I've watched every game. Asia Wilson played, every game Aaliyah Boston played. And as a freshman, neither one of them scored as easily or could be as deliberate and throw out the number of post moves and have the footwork, as well as being able to hit the mid-range jump shot and be, up until the last couple of weeks, an 80% free throw shooter on top of that. And, she's not in the starting lineup. She's not getting all the shots Sarah Strong's getting or Jelani Cambridge is getting. Ohio State's the most overrated program in the country. I don't care what anybody says. You can bet they won't even make it past the Sweet 16. And, I'm not trying to take away anything Michaela Blakes is doing at Vanderbilt. Hell, she scored 53 points in a game. But when you got 10 McDonald's All-Americans, which really seems to piss off Kim Mulkey to no end, you're just not going to have anybody scoring 40 or 50 or even in the 30s like Asia Wilson used to do.
Yeah, and Dawn has talked about that several times. It obviously came up after the Auburn game when, she talked about wanting to kind of create the narrative of, hey, this isn't there's no shoe-in candidate for freshman of the year, like just because Joyce isn't putting up 25 a game or whatever. We do things as a team, but that doesn't mean that we don't have players who are worthy of, individual accolades. She's talked about that for years, but, like you said, that's part of having 10, 11, having an entire roster of McDonald's All-Americans is, everybody, has to kind of play their part. And I think Dawn has done a tremendous job, obviously, of getting people to buy into that, where, I think anybody on the South Carolina roster could go anywhere else in the country and start and play the entire game. So, yeah, I think, that's part of it.
No doubt about it. So let's talk about some other players. Te-Hina Paopao, while she has not been as proficient as she was a year ago from the three, she's down to 37%. Last year, she led the country in three-point field goal percentage at basically 47%. So that's a 10 percentage point dip. She is finding more ways to score. She has been more crafty, getting to the basket, getting to the mid-range. She's got a nice little runner when she gets in to the lane. She's getting to the free throw line a little bit more than last year. Assess her overall play.
Yeah, I think despite the fact, like you mentioned, her three-point percentage just dipped a little bit, she is still such a steady and consistent, scoring piece for this team. If you see her put up a shot, you just kind of assume it's going to go in. Obviously, she's a vet, and that is huge for this roster and everything. But I don't think I've ever been worried once about how Te-Hina Paopao's offensive production will be at any of my month and 5 days on the beat at all. I genuinely, anytime she puts up a shot, I just kind of assume it's going to go in. She's a phenomenal scorer, phenomenal shooter. And I think, like I said, despite the fact that her three-point percentage is down a little bit, she can affect the game in different ways, whether it's, facilitating, passing the ball, but even when it comes to scoring, she's kind of proven that she's more than just a three-point shooter.
So South Carolina's top 2 scorers on the top bench in the country, the only bench in the country that averages more points per game than the starters, Malaysia Fulwiley. On Sunday, we got good Malaysia Fulwiley. She had 17 points. She's still kind of like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get from her. I mean, her 3-point shooting percentage, less than 28%, but she is electric in the open floor. I just think the key for her is finding some consistency and being more judicious in her shot selection. She kind of shoots herself out of the lineup at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think she's but at the same time kind of a spark plug off the bench, and she plays that role really well. I mean, again, not many teams are having their top 2 scorers coming off the bench. But like you said, I mean, she's electric. I've found myself several times in the past month, I'll be sitting there trying to write or something, and then I'll look up, see her do something, look down, and I'll just completely miss a highlight play because it happens all the time. She's constantly doing something crazy to get the crowd going or whatever. But and I think to your point about sometimes she shoots herself out of the lineup, I agree that sometimes that probably happens. I mean, that buzzer beater she hit against good Lord, all the games are meshing together. I've already forgotten which game that was in the second quarter. That might have been the Oklahoma game, I think. I don't know. It's all a blur. But that game, I remember after the game, she was like, well, I knew she couldn't take me out because it was the end of the quarter. I was going to shoot it anyways. But no, I mean, she's electric, and she's kind of fit that perfect spark plug bench player role. And I think it's just, finding a little bit more consistency here or there. You're right. She can be kind of a streaky shooter at times. And that's, no dig at her. It's just kind of, everybody has little streaks like that. But no, she's an electric player and is playing her role perfectly right now.
So I really like what I saw from Breezy Hall on Sunday. Like, for me, she just can't become deprogrammed that she's still just a role player. But she did get off 8 shots on Sunday against Auburn. For me, I'd like to see her every game getting 8, 10, 11, or 12 shots because, I mean, they don't call her Big Shot Breezy for nothing. I mean, she has hit a lot of big shots over the course of her career. I think she needs to be more of a factor, really on both ends of the floor. She's been known as a defensive specialist. I think sometimes she still gets deprogrammed and forgetting, hey, I can't let this player go left. I got to make them go to the right, make them uncomfortable. Sanaya Fagan, we've seen, quite frankly, be the victim of some really bad officiating. I'm just going to lay it out. Women's college basketball had no business taking away the restricted area underneath the basket. Players should not be allowed to just stand under the rim for an entire possession. It's a player safety issue, and that's counterintuitive to making the game more safe for players. And so I guess that's my point there. Chloe Kitts, I like the fact that she's taking more perimeter jump shots. To me, she is more of a stretch player. She really gets herself in trouble, particularly against the best opponents on the schedule when she tries to muscle the ball up from inside. I like her knocking down the perimeter jump shots. Sanaya Fagan is also more of a face-up player. I think that's why we now see Joyce Edwards coming in as the first sub off the bench. It's either her or Malaysia Fulwiley to speed up the game or to get a more diverse skill set in the post. How do you like the rotations and what you've seen from Fagan and Kitts since you've been back on the beat?
Yeah, I think it's funny, during Carolina calls last week, Dawn talked about how she was contemplating benching Sanaya Fagan, and then immediately after that, Sanaya went on a tear and has kind of proven that she deserves to stay in that starting lineup. It's a question I'd like to ask her if we can get her hopefully today at media availability, is ask, Sanaya, hey, what was that text like? But outside of getting in foul trouble last game, I think Sanaya's played well, and I think the plan when Ashton went out was to really, rely on those three of Sanaya Fagan, Chloe Kitts, and Joyce Edwards. And I think all three of them combined have really stepped up and played very well in Ashton Watkins' absence. I think Chloe Kitts, she had a little bit of a slump scoring-wise kind of coming into the new year. And once SEC play started, I think she had 4 or 5 straight games of double digits. It was the first time she'd done that in her career. When she gets going, the offense really gets going. I think Dawn was talking about how there were a couple times against Auburn where she was yelling at Chloe to shoot the ball because she has the ability to shoot, kind of like you mentioned, and every now and then just kind of gets in her head. And so it's been interesting to watch, Dawn kind of encourage Chloe Kitts to, hey, like, you've got the skill, like, let a couple more shots fly, like you can do it. But I think those three have really stepped up in this past month and have kind of solidified, the three of them is, hey, this is who we're going to rely on in the post.
So Tessa Johnson continues to be this team's leading 3-point shooter. Malaysia Fulwiley, who at times is the Will Rogers of women's college basketball. She's never seen a shot she doesn't like. She's attempted 78 3-pointers, but like I said, less than 28%, actually 79 attempts. Pau 97 attempts, but Tessa Johnson is 26 for 63. That's over 41%. But I think Tessa, she never knows when she's going in the game. And I think that's really affected her play of late. She is, I think, probably South Carolina's most skilled offensive player on every level. She can shoot the three. She's great in the mid-range. She's got the size to get in the lane. She's an excellent free throw shooter. I really think it's important for her role to be more consistent on this team. I mean, after all, she was the leading scorer for South Carolina in the national championship game and in the game that sent them to the Final Four. And the numbers don't lie, over 41% from three for Tessa Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, she's a great shooter. We all know that. I think part of, what I've seen from her in recent games is her I feel like her defensive play has stepped up a lot in these past couple of games. So I don't know. Obviously, I'm not privy to conversations between her and Dawn or whatever her, finding a consistent role is and everything. But I feel like in times where, she might not be having a massive impact on the box score, especially the scoring column, she's finding ways to impact the game in other ways. I think there were a couple games recently where, she was doing really good facilitating the offense, kind of running the point and stuff like that. There are a couple of possessions that have popped into my head from recent games where she's been able to, make a big impact on defense, but it's kind of to the point, and it makes me think of Raven Johnson, where, Raven is a very skilled offensive player and will have, stretches of games where she's, not blowing up the scoring column, but is finding ways to impact the game in other ways, whether it's, assists, steals, stuff like that. So I think it goes back to the whole, there's 10 McDonald's All-Americans on the roster. Not everybody can, blow up the scoring column in, any given night and everything. So it's players finding ways to, yes, find a role to kind of like peg themselves into throughout the season, but also knowing that any given night you could come in hey, tonight I'm going to score 16, but tomorrow night I got to have 7 assists and like 4 rebounds and no points kind of deal. So I think that's kind of the thing that we're finding with this team throughout the year is any given night, anybody can pop off, but it's not necessarily we're not waiting on one specific player to do it because we know anybody can and has the ability to.
I mean, Raven Johnson, third leading rebounder on this team, more assists than anybody else, which you would expect. Also, the most steals on the team with 40, and she's got double-digit block shots as well. And, Michael, she started the season 0 for 18 from 3. Even Dawn Staley admitted Raven probably did not do what she should have done in the summer and in the preseason in the gym. But since then, she has hit 16 of her last 36 threes, which, is right at 45%. I like the fact that she's not taking as many because, she doesn't have the most aesthetically pleasing shot. It's kind of weird. I think she's better in the open floor, but Maddie McDaniel, another McDonald's All-American, her minutes have ramped up. She was injured over the Christmas break, missed a lot of practice time, but I think we're really seeing her carve out a role. She's a different kind of player than anybody else they have at the point, and that's just another player you're trying to get some minutes because she is fearless going to the basket. She is a really good on-ball defender, and I think she's the future of the program at point guard.
Yeah, she had a really good game against Tennessee, I believe. I think Malaysia got into foul trouble, and she kind of had I think it was 7 to 9 really stopgap minutes, might have been a little bit more. But she, in those minutes, had a couple points, had a couple assists. She is, I think it's one of those, again, we go back to the depth. Everything we talk about with this team goes back to the depth, and it's somebody like a Maddie McDaniel. It's, okay, we know they're talented. How do we somehow fit them into this rotation full of stars? And I think in the minutes that she has gotten since returning from her injury, and honestly before that, she has been able to prove, hey, if you need to just quick throw a guard in there for 5 to 7 minutes a game, I can do that. And I won't just be another body on the floor. I think she has proven time in and time out that she can have an impact when she is in the game. And again, it's not just hey, we need a fifth player, get out there while we're letting, Raven rest or Malaysia rest. When you put Maddie McDaniel on the floor, she's going to find a way to impact the game. And I think that's huge for, the trust that Dawn has in her as a freshman, but then also just kind of going forward in her development and stuff like that.
No doubt. So South Carolina signed one McDonald's All-American, the early signing period, Isla McDowell from here in Texas over right outside of Houston. She's had a great senior year. She's a 6'2" guard that's shooting over 50% from the field, 42% from 3. There was an interesting guest who was back in Columbia on Sunday for the Asia Wilson jersey retirement, the number 4 prospect in the class of 2025, another McDonald's All-American 6'1" guard, Agot Maker, who is a native of Toronto. She's spending this year at Montverde Academy down in Florida. She's already made an official visit to South Carolina. Her decision announced early last week was coming up in the next 2 weeks, so we're probably looking at a week or 10 days at the most. How big was that for her to be in that environment, in that game, where, there probably could have been she might have bumped into Asia Wilson before or after the game, and probably Joyce Edwards as well. I mean, there are some folks that follow women's recruiting that are saying, hey, South Carolina is probably going to be the team to beat here. What do you think about adding a 6'1" player that, again, can score on all three levels and is a top 5 player in the country? And, I mean, does that mean Kim Mulkey is going to slap the clipboard out of Simone Augustus' hands again?
I think, to your point about, did she run into Asia or Joyce Edwards? I am sure there was a chance run in at some point on Sunday where they were able to run into each other. But no, I mean, to your point, why not add another McDonald's All-American to the roster? I'm sure South Carolina is in a good position. Obviously, I'm, again, not privy to that conversation, but I think anytime you can add in somebody, the little bit that I do know about, Maker's talents, anytime you can add a person like that to the roster, the team is going to continue to get better. So I think it'll be an interesting, next week or so as we wait to see what happens there. But again, I mean, add another McDonald's All-American. Go for it. Do it. I'm sure everybody down in Baton Rouge is going to love that happened. But, they did get – I think LSU had 2 McDonald's All-Americans on this year's team. So they're making a little bit of progress. So Coach Mulkey, I think that'll be like 10 to like 4-2 or something. I don't know. But we'll see how much longer the 10 McDonald's All-Americans gripe. I'm sure that'll hang around for a while now.
Yeah, so I'm a notorious Kim Mulkey insulter. She's got a face that make a freight train take a dirt road. She's got more wrinkles than a cheap suit, but I just think you were probably in the media room when she had her press conference after that Friday game. I mean, it just seems like every question turned her off. She had a kind of a curt answer, and I think she just cannot accept the fact that she is not the queen of the SEC like she was when she was at Baylor in the Big 12. This is not the Big 12, and they recruited Joyce Edwards. They've certainly recruited other players at South Carolina, either that have been acquired through high school or in the portal that hadn't gone her way. I mean, she did pick off 1 or 2 players South Carolina liked. They got, so desperate to get Anissa Morrow, they paid her allegedly, I want to make sure I say allegedly here, an additional 6 figures not to visit South Carolina, which she had promised Dawn Staley she would do. So I think she just needs to shut up and coach her team and quit bitching and complaining. So I guess that's all I got to say about that. So let's look ahead. I mean, we talked about Texas. We really hadn't talked about UConn National Player of the Year candidate. Paige Beckers has got a chance to do something no UConn player's ever done, and that's lose 5 times to South Carolina in the course of her career. But this is a different UConn team this year. They're healthy. Sarah Strong is putting up big numbers. I think her win share is about, in the analytics, is about bigger than anybody else's. She looks a lot like Madison Booker. She doesn't look like the same player she did in high school, just like Madison Booker doesn't look like the same player she was last year. She's reshaped her body. She's leaner. She's quicker. She is an elite 3-point shooter. Azzi Fudd, a generational player. I mean, they've got a roster full of number 1 players and McDonald's All-Americans as well. And certainly Dawn Staley has been getting the better of Gino Auriemma of late. ESPN Game Day is going to be there, barring another blizzard.
Yeah.
Coming through the Midlands or UConn getting snowed in, which, is a possibility this time of year. But I just think that environment's going to absolutely be bonkers on a Sunday afternoon in Columbia with game day there and, the top two programs in the country, South Carolina and UConn over the last 10 years. For Gino, the last, 20 plus years.
Yeah.
So, how much are you looking forward to that?
Extremely. I think it was the third or fourth game I covered as a freshman for the student newspaper was Carolina's first win or Don Staley's first win over UConn. That was a phenomenal atmosphere. It's what made me fall in love with the job. So I'm very much looking forward to that game. Got a couple games before. Don't want to look too far ahead, but I'm extremely excited to be covering that game. I think it's going to be a great game, like first and foremost. But second, it's just, I think it's a great game for women's basketball. Obviously, a great game for both programs, and it's one of those things where playing in the SEC is kind of a barometer for South Carolina in terms of where they are, and having sprinkling in a UConn matchup right in the thick of SEC play is crazy, but it'll be a fun one, that's for sure.
No doubt about it. When you look at UConn and just their roster, KK Arnold, McDonald's All-American, Paige Beckers, National Player of the Year, Ashlyn Shade, McDonald's All-American, a player I really like a lot from Maddie McDaniel's neck of the woods, Cadence Samuels, Caitlin Chin, who's a transfer from Princeton. You got Sarah Strong, Morgan Chili was a McDonald's All-American. Ice Brady, she was McDonald's All-American. Caroline Ducharme, Ayanna Patterson, who's out. Pretty sure I already mentioned Daisy Fudd, and then Aubrey Griffin. That game on February the 16th will probably be more high school All-Americans and more talent sitting on the benches and on the court than any other game maybe in the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, it goes back to my point. You could take anybody on either UConn or South Carolina's roster, put them on any other team in the country, and they'd be the star player. It's going to be insane. It's going to be a phenomenal game, and I'm really looking forward to watching it.
All right. Well, Michael, I can't thank you enough for being with us. Great stuff as always. Are you flying in to Austin for the game on Sunday?
Yes. I'm looking forward to it. Flying out on Saturday morning. I've not been to Austin. Obviously, looking forward to just being in that town. I got to go to San Antonio as a student journalist when Carolina played there in the Final Four. So I've been to Texas before, but I've not been to Austin. Looking forward to that. But then obviously it's been that's part of the fun of the job is traveling and seeing all the different arenas. Obviously got to go to Tennessee last week. That was really cool. But yes, I will be there. Looking forward to it and providing coverage for the state newspaper.
So I think my seats are right behind press row. I'll be in section 109, opposite of the Texas bench. Look for me and Addison.
Will do.
Say hello if you get a chance.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me on, Keith.
All right. Take care, Michael. Safe travels, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Thanks, sir.
All right. That was Michael Sauls, and this was a great powerhouse edition of Gamecock Pod Live. Thanks to everybody for tuning in live and for everybody that'll be listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or watching this on YouTube. So I'll be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, God bless. Go Gamecocks. I am out of here.